Good afternoon. My name is Heather Barta. I am the coordinator of Province 5 and serving as the convener of the Province 5 Creation Care Network. Today is February 13th, 2022, and this is the Creation Care Network meeting hosted by Provinces 4 and 5 and open to everyone. Today we have a lovely guest. Stephanie Johnson is going to share with us a whole lot of pieces. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Hey, everybody. If I'm looking a little frantic, my laptop is plugged in and it's not charging and it's sinking rather rapidly, my charge on my laptop. So if I happen to disappear, I will jump on my phone and you will see me on my little phone. But I just wanted to let you know I have tried everything as you've been doing your lovely introductions to keep this going, and I have no idea why there's no charge on my laptop. So there you go. Thank you, Heather, and thank you for Jerry for inviting me to be here with you. You guys are doing some amazing work. I just, every time I do these sorts of things, I'm like, my goodness, this church is awesome, and God is great. That all of these fabulous things are happening in the context which you've been called to and where you've been placed. I mean, I've heard about advocacy. I've heard about Zero Waste Church. I've heard about funding from the federal government. All of these amazing things come together and create this life-giving ministry. And what's so wonderful and not only life-giving is that the fact that you have all found your niche where you're called to be, right? You're called to be doing the sorts of ministry that you're called to in this particular moment in time. Some of us are called to be advocates. Some of us are called to be liturgists who are rewriting liturgies or writing liturgies. Some of us are called to focus on our congregations or our cathedrals and our buildings, and all of these ranges of ministries are, as I said, not only amazing but hopeful for the church. And Anna being in COP also, what a gift for you to have done that for the larger church witness. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Task Force for the Care of Creation and Environmental Racism. I'm on my third term as chair of this task force. It was formed initially in 2016, and previously there had been an interim body called the Committee on Science, Technology, and Faith, and that sort of morphed into the Care of Creation Task Force, which now became the Task Force for the Care of Creation, Environmental Racism. Through all the General Convention resolutions. I'm not sure how many of you follow all the resolutions, but it's really been part of Presiding Bishop Curry and the House of Deputy President's ministry to have creation care and environmental racism a primary work of the church. I have a little agenda that I wanted to go over, and I'm hoping this can be much more interactive than me just sitting here talking. But I wanted to introduce two things that we are doing on the task force that have been sort of carried over for the past few years, and then talk about some things that are going on around the larger church that you may or may not know about, and then finally some things that I've heard about or been involved in that might be nourishing and supportive of your own ministries and the ministries, the people that you serve in your communities and contexts. So does everybody know about the asset maps that the church has? It's this amazing system of geographic information systems where they layer on data on top of maps on a map, and so you can look and see all sorts of information about your community and your congregation and your community, your county, your state, and your region. And it also now will include parochial report data. So you can click on a church in your diocese or your own church, click it on, see what your parochial report data will be in the future, has been. That's not quite updated. It'll also, the work that we've been doing is trying to add layers about environmental concerns, maybe lead-based issues in your community, maybe issues of Superfund sites, local environmental issues. There's also one for rising water. What's the history of rising water and what's the projections for rising water in certain communities that are coastal? And there's all these different layers of environmental information that can be added onto this website, so you can see what's going on in your community. Part of the reason we're doing this is we're hoping, it goes back to the advocacy, that people can look at their community and see things that they might not have always seen, and recognize maybe where are the needs, where are the justice needs in your community that you can respond to particularly, and have the data that you need to go out and advocate at your local, either your local government or your state government. And so we have this wonderful professor from Ferrum College, who's Delia Heck, who's been working on this for years. She's a member of the task force. And she's wanting to pilot in a few communities or dioceses and see, what happens if you look at these maps? How do you engage in the information? How can you use it most valuably? And what can we do as the task force make the information more readily available to you? So we're going to be looking for some folks maybe who want to try out the maps and do a training with Delia. That's about probably an hour and a half on how to use the maps and find out information that may be helpful, and then sort of brainstorm like, well, now that I know this information is happening, I know this is occurring in my community, I know the history of things like redlining and other issues of justice and inequities and racism. How do I use that information to empower not only my congregation, but the community around me? And so I wanted to bring this up just as a point of information. If anybody who, particularly at a diocesan level, would be interested in having that conversation in their diocese, really appreciate the opportunity to connect. And we can put that in the chat, and we'd love to follow up with you on that. So any questions about the environmental map?
It would be good to keep that address up there a little bit longer. Heather put it out.
It's in the asset map link is in the chat.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So this is a thing that Delia is amazing. And so I think it would be great. So Susan, you guys are in Wisconsin, right?
Right. Yeah, in Beloit.
Okay. I'll see if I can.
And Ira is in Milwaukee. I would just share it with them.
Great. So we'll try to do that. And, we're seeing this as a long-term thing. This is not a one-off. This is not this triennium or mini triennium. This is the long-term, this project. And we've been working on it for at least 2 or 3 years. So I think there's a lot of potential there for, and we really want to work in the next triennium if budget allows, to do training. How do you advocate? How do you advocate? How do you go out in the community? Carl, you mentioned your interest in advocacy at the local level. I think training on that's really important. It's not that easy to go out and speak to groups to lobby. And that sort of training, I think the church is really poised to do around environmental justice issues. Yeah. So I think we're really keyed in on that, the need for that. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the task force is, you may have known or seen over the years, we award grants of fairly substantial amounts. In the past two triennia, church speak, we've awarded over 80 grants to the tune of $700,000, or maybe slightly more. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. And we're anticipating in this very short period of time to award another $200,000 of grants. And so part of the hope, so let me just give you a real quick history. When we first started doing grants in 2016, the big thing that was in, that's still in, is congregational gardens. We got a ton of applications for congregational gardens, really interesting people doing interesting work and liturgies around gardening. Things have shifted over the years, and we've made a big shift in our applications to addressing systemic racism, environmental justice issues, and advocacy. And at the same time, the last round, we got a lot of applications for trees, tree planting in communities that don't have trees, and teaching people about the importance of trees. So over these past 7 years, there's been a tremendous shift in the focus of what we were doing and where we were going from a granting perspective. And also, I think it follows the life of the church in the world, from very focused on congregational work, maybe diocesan work, maybe on preaching, to the bigger, larger issues of justice. And so we will be opening a grant round. Miriam, this is what's going to be on our one of our lists for this next grant round. We recognize that AO87 carbon neutrality by 2030 is a concern and an interest and an exciting spot for the church to be in. So what we're really looking for is organizations that can partner with the Episcopal Church to help us get there. So one of the grants, or maybe more, it depends on what the quality of the grants are and who the applicants are, is if there are organizations out there who can do this sort of work and help us train folks to get to carbon neutrality by 2030, we would prioritize that among the granting decisions. It's not a sure when, or sure give, but the idea here is that General Convention has made a mandate. We believe it's critically important that we follow it. And at the same time, or not a mandate, or strong recommendation, right? And a goal, aspirational and inspirational. And that the church is responsible for, or the task force feels it should have, one of the roles would be to try to foster those conversations and provide resources. So if you know of any groups who have technical ability or the skill set to work with congregations on the 2030 carbon neutral commitment, we would encourage them to apply for the grant. Grants are $10,000 to $20,000 to $25,000. Thanks, Jill. So let me just pop up on the screen. Actually, I wanted to ask before I did that, has anybody gotten a grant in the past 7 years? No. Has anybody, I can't see everybody's faces, so I don't know if anybody's raising their hands. Has anybody applied for a grant? So Anna, you didn't get the grant? Okay.
No, I ended up getting a new Episcopal community grant instead for the same project.
Yeah. One of the things we found is, thanks, Heather. One of the things we found is, and Province 5 has done great, and I know for sure that Province 5 has gotten a lot of grants over the years, is that one, if we have time to do 2 rounds, sometimes we work with the applicants if we think that the grant has a lot of merit and will help them rework it to meet the standards. The second thing is that we also find that some people don't even have the capacity to apply for the grants. And so we're trying to reach out to groups that can't even get to the level. They're not in the group that knows about the grants. And secondly, they just don't have the capacity, but they actually have some really good work they're doing. So we've been pretty proactive looking for folks who, and if you know of any groups or, Episcopal entities, churches, congregations, dioceses, schools, non-for-profits that have an Episcopal history, please do be in touch with me, because we do want to foster folks who don't have the capacity. This is what these grants are about. We find that people who know about grant writing keep applying, which is great, and they're very successful at grant writing. And there's also some needs out there that we don't always know about. All right, 2018. I remember that application, Carl. I read most of the grants, hundreds of them. We won't fund capital. We can't afford capital with our small amount of money. And we won't fund a grant that won't really have a bigger application across the church and that can't be replicated. If it's very singularly focused on your particular context and doesn't seem to have a broader based application, it's just not something we can do, which is why we've stepped back from a lot of congregational gardens, as great as they are. The tree planting ones we did were different because one was the middle school, and they were doing a lot of education around the history of tree planting in the community it was serving. And then another one was a community in Richmond that was really working to build up community parks, and they had huge partnerships. The other part of your application would really have to include partnerships with groups if you can partner. And we recognize, again, with groups that have capacity issues, partnering is hard too. Let me just pop up here really quickly then. See if I can do that. Some of the details of what we're thinking for the grants. So these are the general requirements. They were the same as we did last year. We did a quick round. It was $100,000. There was actually some extra funds left in the budget. So in between the triennium or whatever the year that really kind of went through. These are some of the ideas about the grants. It does not include specifically the carbon neutral, but it will when it comes out. You should have my email address from this conversation. So feel free to reach out to me, and we're planning to have a webinar probably sometime in March, and the grants will be awarded in June. So any comments, questions, or thoughts about the granting process? Okay.
This is Miriam. As I wrote in the chat, we have a vendor who can do energy efficiency assessments, carbon neutral assessments, and help develop plans to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. This particular vendor is even set up to do 63 churches, which is what we have in our diocese. But they cost $150,000 to do that, and we don't have that in our budget.
Right.
And so this particular vendor, if we're able to use them, if we had the money to use them, they could be a resource for other dioceses. They're set up to do large numbers of churches and to help churches to develop, to have the information that they need in order to get to 2030 carbon neutrality. But it takes money. And so there's the obstacle. I don't see in the information you've provided so far that your funding would fund something like this.
Right. I thanks, Miriam. That's really exciting to hear that you're that far along. In the Diocese of Connecticut, we have a very active, extremely active environmental creation care network. And we passed a resolution several years ago about requiring energy audits and submitting that as part of our PROPA report every year. And then connecting up with local utilities, because in Connecticut, the utilities will help us get audits done. But the implementation is different. So this is not meant to suggest that by any means that the grant program would be able to fund the carbon neutral resolution, but rather than to provide folks with some information on how to go about doing it. There's just, $200,000 is very lovely. And it's just practically speaking the funds that we have available. And so we're trying to use it creatively by trying to see if there are some folks out there who can partner with us, the church, and doing some of this work.
This is Ira Liddell. I have a comment. I sent some information to Heather. We have a YouTube that was formed to show how churches can reduce their carbon footprint and use the Inflation Reduction Act to save money from their vendors. And also what was mentioned was the possibility is having people within the congregations that you have and have enough money to fund the loan, and then they would get paid back. Apparently there's a group of church congregations, and I don't think they're Episcopal, in Michigan that has done this. So there's information out there for that kind of funding so that you can really begin things.
That's very interesting to hear and helpful. I know that I've been wondering about the Inflation Reduction Act, that this would be sort of helpful for the churches. And I know in Connecticut we have a group called the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network, and they've been doing webinars similarly about how to access some of the funds and how to do, move ahead with some of this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interfaith Power and Light has been doing a lot of this too. I mean,
Yeah.
that has been a really good resource.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's things out there, and we're just, again, with the $200,000 grants, we're hoping to, last round we funded 10 grants at 20,000 each. We don't have anything set in stone on what we would do with this round, but it seems to make sense to try to find some way to support the church on the carbon neutral. And there's also the pressing other issues of that the church is called to respond to. So it's not going to be the sole focus of the granting round. But do keep your eyes out for the webinar. It'll come across the Episcopal News Service when we have a date for it. Which brings me up to you. Do you all get the Creation Care newsletter that comes out of the presiding bishop's office? Because that's a real good resource. That comes out monthly, usually the middle of the month. Phoebe Chatfield does it. She's always asking for articles for people who are doing wonderful and creative things. And I think this group of folks on this call are doing one.
Can somebody put the link to that in the chat? I can open Windows, but I can't save the chat because I'm on my phone today.
She got frozen.
All right. Thanks. So the newsletter is really great. And again, Phoebe's always looking for people who are doing wonderful ministries, and she wants to share them. So if you could, reach out to that and make sure you're getting that information, that'll be wonderful to bring the church closer together. So back to my agenda. Sorry, I didn't hit share. So I don't know if anybody from sorry, I'm not sure why it's not opening. Technology, huh? So the presiding bishop's office got a grant last year, which is really kind of cool, from the UTO. I don't know if anybody applied for the UTO grants. They were doing a lot of granting last year. They had all of their grants were focused on Creation Care, and the presiding bishop's office received a grant to do a curriculum and to do some liturgical work. And that grant was, as I said, for a curriculum. I don't know if anybody did the Sacred Ground work. So this curriculum is sort of modeled on that, but it's about environmental racism, environmental justice. And so they've been trying it out. They've developed a lot of the curriculum so far. And I believe it's going to be released sometime this summer. But it's been piloted, it's been tested out. It's been, a lot of folks have been invited into conversations on what the curriculum could look like. And so it's going to have videos, it's going to have conversation starters. It's going to be a terrific resource both for dioceses and for congregations. And a separate component of that, which is what I'm working on generally, is liturgical resources for Creation Care. And what I'm particularly passionate about is understanding how that we respond to the climate emergency. How do we respond to our grief, and how do we come out with hope? And so I've been trying to understand what people are doing for worship around that. Are they writing prayers? Are they writing words of lament when they're engulfed in forest fires, when they're swamped with water, when their communities have been flooded? And where do they find the possibility of God in the midst of it, or the knowledge of God? And then also, what do we do when we go out and advocate? Do we pray before we go into a legislature's office? Do we have words of, centering ourselves on God? And so not having it being a secular activity, but actually, what is it that how do we present ourselves to God before we present ourselves to the public sphere? How do we bless solar panels? How do we bless things that are saving our energy? So those are sort of liturgical things that I'm really intrigued by, and I'm sort of asking the question to all of you going forward now and in the past if you've done this work, but I'd like to curate some of that materials and share it as part of this UTO project. And that was sort of the component that I had been intrigued with and I'm still intrigued with. So yeah, I want to pause there and also let you know that my computer is down to 20%. Questions, comments about the UTO curriculum and the liturgical component of it. Thoughts? Has anybody used the Sacred Ground curriculum? Yeah. Yeah. I think this is going to be remarkable given the folks who are around the table on this curriculum effort. And I think it's going to be really helpful to all of your ministries to ground folks in their calling and why this is sacred work.
So is the Sacred Ground curriculum separate from the UTO?
Oh, thanks for the question. Yeah, so the Sacred Ground,
I'm not familiar with it.
The UTO grant, Sacred Ground was done a few years ago. The church's call for folks to respond to and to act on and to lament and consider the sin of racism. And there were community circles that were formed and people across the church were using it in all different ways and building a community, reflecting on their own role and complicity in racism and their own response to how or their laments over this, how racism has affected them personally. So that was Sacred Ground, and that is Sacred Ground. So I used it in my congregation. And so it's, how does one, so that was Sacred Ground. So the idea was to sort of use that model of community circles, of forming a curriculum that's informed by different voices and presenting it about environmental racism and environmental injustice and care of creation. And so UTO gave the grant to do the work.
Okay.
Long answer, but that's
helpful. Thank you.
And it's modeled on the same thing. And like I said, given what Sacred Ground was for so many people, I think it will be hopefully transformative for the church.
I'm very excited about that. I'm sorry I came a little late, but I've facilitated a number of Sacred Ground things, and it is so powerful. We also are doing a one-day training in racial healing, but the Sacred Ground, now it's 11 sessions, and it is just, I think it's brilliant. And so when might this other curriculum get rolled out?
I think the expectation is sometime this summer. I don't want to give a firm date because I'm not doing it, and I don't want to put a date on it. But I can tell you where you're going to find out about it a little bit more, and that's my next agenda item. You're going to see it in May?
I'll talk more about that later. Keep going.
Yeah. So I don't know if you all know about the July event. July 9th through 12th. It's all about love, a festival of the Jesus movement. Have you heard about that? It is, someone said it's all the fun of General Convention without the legislation. I shouldn't say that because I love the legislation part, but it's a gathering, a revival. It's sort of just a gathering of people from out the church. I think they've reserved many hotel rooms for you all to come, and it's 3 days of learning and worship and workshops and networking and conversations. And it's the three themes are evangelism, creation care, and racial reconciliation. And so there's going to be a huge component of those 3 days about creation care. Workshops on preaching, workshops on advocacy training. My guess is the curriculum will be rolled out by then. And so Good News Gardens, beekeeping. I mean, whatever it is you can think of that the church can do, all the things that you're doing is going to be gathered there. And there's going to be all of these events surrounding these 3 days. So I don't know if any of you are able to go, but do keep your eyes out. Some of it's going to be online, I think. There's going to be some hybrid portions to it, but it's sure to be a remarkable time.
Did you say where it is?
It's in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, thank you.
July,
Did you also say July?
July 9th through 12th. It's called, just don't know why I can't share this. July 9th through 12th, it's called, It's All About Love, a festival of the Jesus movement. And you're sure to hear the presiding bishop. And I'm sure you'll hear more from Heather about that in the weeks and months ahead. So if you're able to go, and if not, just do keep an eye on the hybrid options, because I do think it's going to be pretty remarkable. I'm mindful of the time, and I want to have some comments and conversation. I just want to bring up two things that I've been working on that are interesting and intriguing to me. Blessed Tomorrow is a group out of Washington, D.C. Does anybody know about them? They are an interfaith ecumenical group that is part of this organization called Eco America that's responding to climate change. And they do something called Climate Ambassador Training. It teaches folks in faith traditions how to advocate, how to speak about climate change, what words that make sense and resonate. They have done a remarkable amount of research nationally about how different words engage people and turn off folks, actually, in terms of engaging folks and having motivation around climate and climate emergency. And so they're deeply research-based, and they do these national surveys and polls to find out, how is the best way to talk about climate change in different communities and different contexts. And then they write these resources based on that information. And so it's deeply well thought, very accessible, and they are in relationship with the Episcopal Church, and they've done some climate ambassador training workshops for the Episcopal Church. They will do one in Baltimore, a training session. They did one in Austin a few years back, but their resources are tremendous. It's called Blessed Tomorrow, out of Eco America, and they have resources for preaching. And they're because it's so research based, I think that they understand, and they do a lot on the psychological impacts of climate change, and the physical impacts. They collaborate with also public health folks. So it's just a remarkable resource I really want to call your attention to. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, well, actually two other things I'm involved in. Yale University Graduate School is having a conference next month on grief, eco grief. And there's been a movement to have conversations and training for people to do eco chaplaincy. I don't know if anybody's heard about this movement, but it's particularly driven by, from my experience, by younger folks, folks in their 20s and 30s, younger than me. I just want to be clear, that's what I mean. Who are feeling a deep sense of grief and loss over the future of the world and the current status of the world. And so there are a lot of them are organizing on how to be chaplains. And this conference is based on eco grief and eco chaplaincy. It's March 3rd. I can send you the information. I'm not sure if it's all going to be hybrid or if it's going to be, mostly it's in person, but they might do some links for that. It's a pressing issue for people of faith, and actually I think we're best positioned to deal with grief. And then the last organization that I'm involved with is the Center for Earth Ethics out of Union Seminary. They do a tremendous amount of work with indigenous communities and advocacy and civil disobedience. How does one protest in the public sphere and raise awareness of the degradation of the earth? So the Center for Earth Ethics, in fact, their board meeting starts in 10 minutes. So I'll have to hop off. So there. I know I threw a lot at you. There's so many good things going on. Yeah, so questions, conversations.
I'm going to jump in real fast. So this is Heather again, and Stephanie, thank you for being with us. And we're going to have some time for some questions. The one big thing I want to add to the video is I want to make sure to invite everybody to May 5 through 7, 2023 at Louisville, Kentucky, a Creation Care event. So the links to that will also be in the chat and in the notes. So I'm going to stop recording and we can have a conversation. Thanks again, Stephanie, for being with us. Tons of information. So all of that is in the notes that go along with this February meeting.